Okay, so here we go, Harmony. Here is the rest of the chapter 2 study guide. I'm sorry, I'm just getting it up a little late for you. Um, Been a busy couple of weeks for me as well. So the question 3 asks about delegated, reserved, and concurrent powers. These are the powers that are created by federalism. Remember, federalism is the division of powers between the national government and state governments. That's how we use federalism. The definition is actually definition or the division of power between a central and local government. So in our case, the central government is our national government, and the local governments are our state governments. So federalism creates three types of powers: delegated, reserved, and concurrent. Delegated powers are the powers that are given directly to the national government. Reserved powers are the powers that are reserved to the states. And concurrent powers are powers that are shared by both the state and national governments. Okay. Um, it would be good to kind of understand or have an example of each. So, like a concurrent power would be the power to tax, both the state and national government tax. An example of a reserve power, a power reserved to the states, all sorts of licensing, um, drinking age, voting laws. Most laws are reserved laws. Most powers are reserved to the states. And then a national government, things like making war, power to make war, um, carrying on diplomatic relations with foreign countries. Those are delegated powers that the national government has by itself. Question 4 was about the type of delegated powers. There's three: express powers, implied powers, and inherent powers. Express powers are powers that the national government has because they are written in the Constitution. The Constitution would say something like the national government or Congress or the president has the power to do this. That's an express power. It's expressly written in the Constitution. An implied power is a power that is reasonably suggested by an express power. It comes from what is known as the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, or sometimes called the elastic clause. So they are powers that are necessary and proper or reasonably suggested. Um, the implied powers were an issue in the court case of McCulloch versus Maryland. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that there are powers that go beyond the express powers that the national government has. The national government has to have these powers that are reasonably suggested or are necessary and proper for carrying out the express powers. So that's implied powers, and their source of justification or validation is the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, which is sometimes called the elastic clause because it can be stretched depending on the Supreme Court of the time, the makeup of the Supreme Court, whether it's primarily liberal or primarily conservative. The Supreme Court determines whether an action by Congress is constitutional or not. So, in other words, they're determining whether something Congress does fall within their interpretation of implied powers or whether it doesn't. So the Supreme Court is the determining factor of whether something is an implied power or whether it goes beyond the powers that the national government should exercise. And the third type is inherent. An inherent power is a power that the government has because it is a government. It's a power that you would expect a government to be able to exercise. For example, in 1803, when Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, he was exercising an inherent power. We would expect a country to be able to add territory in an appropriate manner when the opportunity arises, and that's what Thomas Jefferson did in purchasing the Louisiana Purchase or making the Louisiana Purchase. So that's an example of an inherent power. Question 5 are about principles of the Constitution. Principles of the Constitution include limited government. We talked about limited government in question 2. Remember, limited government is created. We limit government power by the establishment of federalism and separation of powers. You have federalism. That is a principle of our Constitution. Again, that's the division of power between it, in our case, our national government and our state governments. We have separation of powers. That's the separating of the three government powers, executive, judicial, and legislative powers, among our three branches. Checks and balances is a system we use to maintain the separation of powers so that no one branch becomes more powerful than the other two branches. We have judicial review. Judicial review is the idea that the Supreme Court, the court system, has the power to interpret actions by Congress and by the president and to determine if those actions are constitutional or not constitutional, if they're unconstitutional. The court case involved with that is Maryland versus Marbury, Marbury versus Madison, and that involved the appointment of judges right at the end of John Adams's presidency. And when Thomas Jefferson became president, he sent out Marbury to take those, he sent out John Quincy Adams to send out James Madison. I'll start all over. I'm sorry. Sent out James Madison to take back those appointments that had been made. Those appointments were known as the midnight judges because they were made at midnight, right at the end of the Federalist reign of power in the presidency. And Marbury, who was one of the men who had been given this judgeship, challenged it. So wait a minute, you can't do that. It was given by the previous president. So the Supreme Court ruled that yes, in fact, that was that Jefferson had the right to do that because he was the new president and they had been done at the last minute. It's very similar to what's being done now with the Republicans trying to push through a new appointment to the Supreme Court. But Marbury versus Madison is a court case that establishes or reaffirms or affirms the power of the Supreme Court to declare acts of the president or the Congress to be unconstitutional. And that's called judicial review. And then popular sovereignty is simply the idea that the people are the source of all government power. In our system of government, the Constitution was ratified by the people. The government was created by the people. We elect people to represent us. If we have a problem with the people that represent us, we can vote them out. The power rests with us. Now, it may not seem that way sometimes. This is why it's important to understand our system and to be involved, to vote, if you feel necessary to get involved in other political issues that you feel are not in accordance with this concept of popular sovereignty. And so the power ultimately rests with the people. We created the Constitution. We ratify the Constitution. We elect the people who represent us. We elect, whether it be on the local, state, or national level, those people get their power from us. And if we don't like the way they're using it, then we can vote them out. So that's the idea of popular sovereignty. The formal amendment process. First of all, the formal amendment process changes the written word of the Constitution. You will see, if you look at a copy of the Constitution, you'll see parts of it's marked out or added to. So the formal amendment process changes the written word of the Constitution. There's two ways to propose a formal amendment, and there's two ways to ratify. So there's four combinations. The first two ways to propose are 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress, or a national convention called by Congress when 2/3 of the state legislatures request such a convention. The two ways to ratify are 3/4 of state legislatures have to vote yes, or 3/4 of state conventions would have to vote yes. So when we take those two ways to propose and two ways to ratify, there's four possible methods. The first combination would be a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress and ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures. That method's been used 26 of the 27 times. 26 of our 27 amendments have used that first method. The second combination or the second method would be, again, proposed by 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress and then ratified by 3/4 of state conventions instead of state legislatures. This method has been used once. It was used for the 21st Amendment because the 21st Amendment was the only amendment, or the First Amendment, and remains the only amendment that repealed or canceled a previous amendment. The 21st Amendment is the amendment that ended prohibition. The prohibition was created by the 18th Amendment, so we are repealing or canceling out a previous formal amendment. And at the time, they thought, well, you know what, maybe we should make this more democratic and allow state conventions to ratify instead of state legislatures. The other two methods involve the second way to propose, and they've never been used. But the second way to propose, again, is a national convention when called by Congress, when requested by 2/3 vote of both of state legislatures. And then you would have the same two ways to propose or to ratify: 3/4 of state legislatures or 3/4 of state conventions, to create the third and fourth method. But that way of proposal has never been used, and therefore those last two methods, the third and fourth method, have never been used. They could be; they're in the Constitution, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely. So that's the rest of the study guide, the Chapter 2 study guide. We took our test over that, so you have the information now. You can prepare and take that assessment. The assessment is on PowerSchool. We've begun Chapter 3. There are a couple videos about federalism there that you should be watching that cover. There's a video, a crash course video about federalism, and there is a Hip Hughes video about federalism. You should watch both those and do a video summary of those, and then turn those into me. I think on one of them I forgot to have a turn-in tab, so you could just share it to me. But that would be the next step after taking your assessment. I hope you're doing better, feeling better, and are able to get some of this stuff done. And I'll look to see some work from you soon, hopefully. Have a good day. Bye.